Good Old Boys and Fine Young Men by J. Wilburn. Ellis Merritt helped his dad load the combat gear into the cage welded on the back of their truck. Ellis's attention drifted across the street to the barricaded and barred buildings that used to be the shops of Main Street in Jessup. It wasn't the shops, but Beth standing there talking to Kevin that had his attention. Ellis thought, not for the first time, that he should have told her how he felt about her a long time ago, back when they were in school, back before the world ended. Would have been a great time to say something. Any time since they fenced off and built walls to fortify Jessup and the surrounding farms would have done fine too. He'd done the math on those left behind in town. Even with all the deaths from these little trips out into the wild, the odds were still against the guys in finding a match. It was a hell of a time to be alone. If an apocalypse didn't give you the courage to share your feelings, maybe there wasn't much hope for you. Beth leaned up to kiss Kevin full on the mouth, even with other adults walking all around them on this busy morning. Ellis sighed out all his breath and felt deflated. His dad clapped him on the back with a sharp pain through the chill of morning. It was loud enough that others turned to look. Maybe they confused it for a gunshot at first. Dad asked, "Something wrong with your head?" Ellis paused and his eyes couldn't hold contact with his father's glare before he dug up an answer. It wasn't the question or the look, but the tone Ellis recognized as trouble. That stayed the same before and after the collapse of society. It told Ellis he had committed some sin or minor stupidity that required addressing. Everyone knew why they were here and what was to come, but Dad was asking about something to do with the boy's performance, attitude, or disposition. Ellis took his shot and answered, "Just trying to get my thoughts in order, get myself focused on what needs doing. Do it without distracting yourself on anything other than the business at hand. Today is a killing day, and if you don't have your head right from the very start, it will be your day to die. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Ellis kept his eyes down as they finished tying everything off. Head down and constantly working seemed to be the posture Dad preferred from his son. After they finished that, Ellis set about adjusting his personal gear. Again, he kept his eyes cast down for his dad's benefit. The camo layers he wore were thick, which was good for the morning chill, but would be stifling once the fighting started. The protective layers would mean nothing if he had loose seams. They'd be leaving him on the field if he screwed that up. All the connections appeared solid, but he checked over them 2 more times. These double and triple checks were for him, not Dad. Ellis pulled up his hood and made sure the mask and coverings were all good. After that, he pulled them back down to breathe easier and feel the sunlight a little while longer. The other guys gathered around the vehicles and loaded up as drivers and gunmen stepped into the cabs. Lester, Sutton, and good old Kissing Kevin climbed into the cage behind Ellis's dad's truck. He followed them up and closed the gate. Other guys climbed behind the rest of the trucks that had less gear stowed. The 4 boys in Ellis's truck found places to sit or squat as best they could. Dad's truck lumbered out first, and the others fell into line, following close to each other's bumpers, but keeping a steady distance as they all rolled. They left the populated pocket of town. A number of people watched, but no one waved. Ellis looked at Kevin's profile and then searched the passing street for Beth, but did not see her. He imagined Kevin dying and Ellis himself being the one to break the news to her, maybe to comfort her in her time of grief. He thought what a terrible thing that would be to wish upon someone and banished the thought from his mind before it could become a wish. They rolled between fenced-off farms. A couple guards opened the first set of gates, and the convoy drove through. They closed the gates back behind the last truck before rolling open the solid sheet metal barrier between Jessup and the rest of the open world. Dad took a right on the next street outside, and the others followed at a set distance from one another. They traveled along the rust-colored walls of Jessup and then left those behind as well. The wind stung cold inside the cage where the boys huddled, rocking back and forth with the motion of the vehicle. Still, Ellis left his hood down for now. Nobody spoke. There was no chatter or ball busting. Ellis couldn't hear the other vehicles, but he suspected they observed the same weighty silence. Time passed slowly as they rolled quickly toward the killing ground. They made a turn at the Longford Funeral Home. The parking lot was cracked and empty except for long yellow grass breaking through in uneven rows. Vines climbed and separated the old brick. A few panes of glass had been broken out. Rotten wood showed termite damage at the connections. The place was of no use anyway because all the dead were outside, now rotting in the open air. Ellis smelled greenery that reminded him of mowed grass, but he couldn't place where it came from before it had passed. Keene Lake rose into view to their right. It sat flat, dark, and still, with twists of mist hovering over its surface and around the edges. Dad left the road just past the lake, and the convoy circled out with him. Out here, a swampy odor of gassy decay wafted over from the wetlands around the southern end of the lake. This smell lingered and refused to let go of the morning. As the wheels laid down the tall grass, the open ground revealed more trucks, more men, and more armed boys already there. The convoy stopped a little shy of where they would have otherwise parked without the company waiting for them. Dad opened his door as quickly as he could put the truck in park. "Arm up, boys, and be ready. It's almost time to spill some blood." Ellis opened the gate, and everyone hopped down before they untied their weapons. Each young man tested the balance and the hoist of the blades and bludgeons they had brought to do their business this day. With their hoods still down, they marched out to meet the other boys between the two lines of vehicles from different fortified settlements. The drivers and other men stayed with the trucks on both sides. "Where do you think they're from?" Sutton asked. "Has to be Screven," Lester said. "Why does it have to be Screven?" Kevin asked. Ellis answered, "If they came from anywhere else around, we would have seen them passing our walls." Kevin took a deep breath and let it out. He licked his lips, the same lips Beth had kissed with all she had to give. He said, "We're pretty far from Screven." Ellis nodded and said, "So they must be serious about why we're here." One of the boys from the other group called out loud enough so his words echoed. "You Jessup kids sure do sleep in. Are you good and rested?" You guys lost?" Ellis called back as they stopped a few feet apart from one another. Every boy was armed with something sharp or brutal. "You can probably follow your noses back home. Screven smelled to high heaven before the world ended." "Not since the paper mill shut down," one younger boy from Screven said. "Shut up, man." A bigger boy next to the kid who spoke of the paper mill elbowed him. "He's saying we smell. It's trash talk." "Are you guys ready for this?" another Screven boy asked. Mumbling rustled up and down the line of the Jessup boys. Ellis took it upon himself to answer. "We'll do our best not to hurt you while we do all the work." "We'll see, smartass." The kid pulled up his hood and covered his face with a gas mask. The other kids on both sides brought up their hoods as well, turning their faces into insectile snouts that hid their human identities and personalities. Ellis checked the seals around his mask twice before he brought his hands back firm on his weapon. The swampy smell gave way to the stink of rubber. After a couple seconds, Ellis smelled his breath and hated it for the few moments it took his respirator to clear that. They faced one another with lifeless glass and plastic for eyes. Then the roars and gurgles rose from the tall grass around the marshes that bordered Keene Lake. Every boy turned in that direction, and the groups from both towns merged in the middle into one force. The first mutant shuffled wet and decaying from the marsh. In the shadows that still clung to the ground from morning, the toxic mutant glowed unnatural green from its poisoned skin and dripping flesh. Ellis decided he was thankful for the rubber and bad breath smells. Everyone held back at first. A few even recoiled. Ellis cast a look at the stoic face of his dad leaning on the fender of the truck. Then Ellis stepped out from the rest of the boys and marched to meet the mutants. The other Jessup boys followed quickly. Not but a beat later, the young men from Screven fell into pace as well. No one was interested in being shown up in front of their fathers or other men from their respective settlements. Ellis made sure his sides were clear, and then he swung into the mutant's moist skull. 3 other blades and 4 bludgeons followed, taking the monster apart from top to bottom. Once it was on the ground, the boys didn't let up. The dangers had been instilled into them by constant reminders. As the broken pieces of the toxic creature tried to crawl toward them, they continued to break and slice the thing into smaller and smaller pieces until those toxic bits stopped twitching too. They had no time to catch their breath through their respirators before 3 more crawled out of the muck into view. The boys separated into 3 half circles to deal with the new threats. Ellis's unit made swift work, starting from the head and working their way down. The one on the right gave more trouble, grabbing a few of the boys after its arms had come off. Ellis nearly went over to help, but they finally got their own monster pulverized on their own. Another 7 mutants excised themselves from the wet ground and labored toward the boys. Ellis and the others backed up and spread out like they'd been trained. They did it before their fathers had a chance to yell the instructions to them again. These did not want to go down. Ellis, Kevin, Lester, and Sutton found themselves striking and retreating over and over well into the dry ground and grass. One of the boys mumbled something through his mask, but Ellis couldn't make out the words or who had spoken. He cried out, but made sure to articulate every syllable. "Just keep it on us. Keep striking its head and joints." They ducked a few grabs, but finally brought the creature down and dispatched its pieces without getting into trouble. The 4 of them cheered through their masks as they stepped over the melting, steaming pieces of ruined flesh, killing the grass. As Ellis brought his eyes up and forward, he couldn't believe what he was seeing through the lenses of his mask. One of the Screven kids had found himself pinned under the mostly intact body of a mutant. He still screamed as the green teeth tore into him over and over. Ellis couldn't tell for sure, but the kid was little. He could have been the same boy who mentioned the paper mill. Kids from the other pockets of fighters from both towns stood over their defeated mutants. Defeated mutant flesh, but only watched as the surviving mutant feasted. One of the older men from Screven, with no mask nor a patch of protective gear, walked onto the scene with a rifle. The boys around the attack backed up a step. The old man shot the boy instead of the monster. The mutant didn't seem to mind as he continued to eat. The old man was still yelling as he turned his back and returned to his truck across the field on the Screven side. The only bit of conversation Ellis picked up was, "Clean up your own damn mess." The other boys beside their dead friends started chopping into the toxic creature again. The operation started reluctantly, but then picked up in intensity as it turned into a frustrated revenge killing. "Whatever works," Ellis mumbled to himself. The others watched even as another scattering of mutants approached the field. Ellis ran forward and started shoving his friends in the direction of the attack. When they still didn't respond, he cursed at them and shoved their heads at the approaching wave of mutants. Everyone started to wake up and they lifted their weapons. All of them were out of formation, but at least they were back on task. The day dragged on with little relief. The Screven boys struggled to keep up. Ellis meant to go over and lend them a hand after each kill he completed, but there would be 2 more to deal with in front of him every time. None of the men came out to help. This was young men's work after all. Some more of the Screven boys went down. Others panicked and backed away as the rest fought but found themselves overwhelmed. Ellis and a few others turned to help, but the mutants, still chewing the bites they had taken, decided to turn on the Jessup kids on their own. Again, Ellis and his friends had their hands full. A few Screven men whistled and waved the survivors over to their trucks. The kids, overcome by mutants, were left screaming and begging for their lives. Now Ellis and his friends from his own town found themselves backing away as they fought. No one from Jessup whistled or called a retreat, so their fight continued. In one very brief pause in the action, Ellis watched the trucks from Screven drive away, with the cage doors banging and untied gear falling out of the backs. He looked around to try to do a quick inventory of his friends. The masks made identification tricky, but he didn't see Kevin. Ellis scanned the victims on the ground in the distance, but couldn't get a good look at them. It'd have to be sorted out later. He tried not to think about Beth. The boys from Jessup kept fighting. The grass around the killing field had turned white and withered away to large patches of dead, spoiled ground. Pieces of flesh smoked and burned in these patches, making the air waver all around them. Even if the other men wanted to help, they would pass out cold and dead before they got a few feet into this putrid kill zone. Finally, the boys in their gas masks, with the metal of their weapons turning black from all the fluids off the toxic mutants, fought back to the position where the boys from Screven had been abandoned by the men of their town. There wasn't much left, but at least the last few feeding mutants were distracted. One creature's shoulder was barely attached, the bone ground and twisted in the exposed joint. A single dark and knotty vein pulsed with whatever sludge served as blood for these monsters. The boys made short work of them. It was It was short for their weary muscles and for the amount of chopping required to make all the pieces of a mutant finally go still. The others started to walk away, but Ellis shouted through his mask, "We have to finish the victims, too." Everyone paused before coming back to help take apart the boys from Screven. When it was all over, the men got back into the cabs of their truck before the boys arrived. Even the fumes off their clothes and weapons could be deadly. Ellis's dad lingered outside his truck for a moment. He called out, "I'm so damn proud of you. You showed courage and leadership. Beautiful work." The door slammed shut and Ellis's friends patted his back. There was Kevin, alive and well inside his mask and gear. Good for him and Beth. They tossed their weapons into the center of the truck bed, and the 4 boys from Ellis's dad's truck gathered around the edges inside the cage. As the convoy circled out, the boys kept their masks on. They were going back toward Jessup, but would be kept in a separate area for a few days. Ellis wasn't looking forward to the detox washdowns. It always hurt his skin. It was hard to hear through the masks and the wind of the speeding trucks, but one of the guys yelled, "How many do you think Screven lost today?" If anyone answered, Ellis didn't hear it. He knew he had no answer. Kevin shouted out from across the cage from Ellis, "I miss Beth. I wish I could see her sooner." Ellis felt comfortable staring at Kevin through the concealment of his masks, of their masks. A swirl of toxic jealousy burned inside his gut. There just weren't as many options for girlfriends since the world ended. I'm going to add one thing. I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to anyway. Not in Jessup, anyway. He should have had the courage to tell Beth how he felt sooner. Ellis turned around to face the bars of the cage and watched the dead world unfold beside him, mile after empty mile.